The graduation party in the sprawling Westchester backyard was picture perfect, a testament to 17 years of Daniel's hard work and funding. But as he stepped forward to join the toast, glass raised high, he saw his wife's hand gently push his arm down, her eyes darting toward the biological father who had just arrived uninvited. It wasn't the arrival that shattered him, but the whisper he wasn't meant to hear between mother and daughter, that he was merely the wallet, never the blood. The smile remained fixed on Daniel's face, but behind his eyes, the lights of the house had already gone out. If you understand the silence of a man who realizes he has been building a home for strangers, stay with me, Tos. There is a specific kind of heartbreak that comes from being used. And if you want to see how the quietest men exact the heaviest price, don't look away. The kitchen island was made of Carrara marble, cold to the touch and unforgiving, much like the atmosphere in the Rhys household that Tuesday evening. Daniel Rhys stood by the espresso machine, the low hum of the grinder filling the silence that had settled over the room the moment he entered. At the breakfast nook, bathed in the soft, golden light of the late afternoon sun, sat his wife, Elena, and his stepdaughter, Sophie. They were heads together, scrolling through a tablet, their laughter a private melody that excluded him. It had been this way for months, a tightening of the circle that left Daniel orbiting on the outside. The catering quote came in, Daniel said, placing a ceramic cup on the counter. He didn't raise his voice. He never did. He was a man of blueprints and structures, accustomed to solving problems with logic and patience. It's higher than we discussed, Elena. The vintage champagne tower might be excessive for a high school graduation. Elena didn't look up immediately. She swiped a finger across the screen, her manicured nail clicking against the glass. When she finally turned to him, her expression was one of practiced tolerance, the look one gives a tedious waiter. It's not just a party, Daniel. It's Sophie's 18th. It's her debut into the world, Elena said, her voice smooth, carrying that slight edge of condescension she reserved for discussions about money. We can't look cheap, not when the Andersons are doing a full gala for their son. Sophie chimed in, not looking at him, her eyes still glued to the screen. Julian said he's bringing some people from the label. It has to be cool, Daniel. Not corporate. Daniel felt the familiar sting at the mention of the name. Julian, the biological father who had missed 12 years of birthdays, only to resurface now that Sophie was polished, pretty, and heading to an Ivy League school, tuition paid in full by Daniel. Julian is bringing guests? Daniel asked, leaning against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest to hold himself together. I thought this was a family event. Close, friends and family. He is family, Sophie snapped, her head snapping up. Her eyes, usually so warm when she wanted the keys to the Audi, were hard. I didn't say he wasn't, Daniel corrected gently. I just meant that the budget is stretching, Sophie. I'm the one signing the checks, and I need us to be realistic. Elena sighed, a dramatic exhalation that signaled the end of her patience. She stood up, walking over to the fridge to retrieve a bottle of water, bypassing Daniel as if he were a piece of furniture. Stop making everything about the money, Daniel. It's so transactional with you. You act like you're buying shares in her happiness, Elena said, unscrewing the cap. Julian is offering to have the band play. He's contributing culture, spirit. That's something you can't write a check for. Daniel watched her. He took in the elegant lines of her face, the woman he had loved and supported for 15 years. He looked at the girl he had taught to ride a bike, the girl whose tears he had dried when Julian failed to show up for the middle school recital. I'm not trying to be transactional, Daniel said, his voice dropping an octave, heavy with a fatigue that went bone deep. I'm trying to be a father who wants his daughter to have a future, not just a party. The room went still. The air pressure seemed to drop. Sophie laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, devoid of humor. She looked at her mother, then back at Daniel, her expression twisting into a sneer of teenage cruelty. God, stop trying so hard, Sophie said. You're a great provider, Daniel. We appreciate it, really. But don't pretend you're my dad. You're not real family. You're the guy Mom married. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't the heat of the words, but the casual truthfulness of them. Elena didn't correct her. She didn't gasp. She didn't scold her daughter. She simply took a sip of her water, her eyes meeting Daniel's with a blank, challenge-filled stare. She's stressed, Daniel, Elena said finally, dismissing the devastation in the room with a wave of her hand. Just sign the check for the caterer. We'll handle the guest list. Daniel stood there for a long moment. He looked at the checkbook sitting on the marble counter. He looked at the two women who were already turning back to their tablet, the circle closing again. Right, Daniel whispered. He didn't pick up the pen. He picked up his coffee, turned, and walked out of the kitchen. They didn't watch him go. They didn't see the way his hand trembled slightly, or the way the light died in his eyes. They thought the conversation was over. They didn't realize that the family had ended right there, in the quiet hum of the afternoon. 3 days later, the house smelled different. It was a subtle shift. The underlying scent of lemon polish and Daniel's crisp, unscented laundry detergent had been overpowered by something muskier, richer, patchouli and pain, stale tobacco smoke, clinging to a leather jacket, draped carelessly over the banister in the foyer. Daniel closed the front door quietly, setting his briefcase down on the hardwood floor. It was past 8 o'clock. Usually the house was winding down, the rhythm of their lives predictable and safe. Tonight, however, laughter spilled from the dining room, loud, raucous, and unfamiliar. He walked down the hallway, loosening his tie. In the dining room, the scene was like a tableau of a life he wasn't part of. The table was strewn with takeout containers from the high-end sushi place downtown, the one Daniel usually suggested for special occasions, but which Elena claimed was too expensive for a weeknight. At the head of the table sat Julian. Time had been kind to the musician. He was leaner than Daniel remembered from the few awkward handovers years ago, his hair silvering in a way that looked distinguished rather than aged. He held a glass of red wine, Daniel's 2015 Cabernet, pulled from the reserve rack in the cellar, and was gesturing animatedly with his free hand. Elena was leaning forward, her chin resting on her palm, her eyes bright and focused entirely on her ex-husband. Sophie sat next to him, mimicking his posture, looking at him with a hunger for approval that made Daniel's chest ache. "Daniel!" Julian spotted him first, raising the glass in a mock salute. "The man of the hour. We were just talking about the old tour bus days. Sophie can't believe we survived without Wi-Fi." "Hello, Julian," Daniel said, his voice even. He walked to the sideboard to pour himself a water, needing something to do with his hands. "I didn't realize you were coming over tonight." "Spur of the moment," Elena said, finally glancing at her husband. Her flush didn't fade. "Julian is in town for the week leading up to the ceremony. We needed to go over the logistics." "Right. The logistics," Daniel said. He took a seat at the far end of the table, opposite Julian. The distance felt like miles. "Actually, that's what we were stuck on," Sophie said, pushing a printed seating chart across the mahogany surface toward Daniel. It was the diagram for the gala dinner following the graduation ceremony. Daniel looked down. The round tables seated 10. At table 1, the family table, the names were penciled in. Sophie, Elena, Julian. Daniel's name was not there. He scanned the paper. He found Daniel Rhys assigned to table 2, alongside Elena's distant cousins and a few neighbors they barely spoke to. "I think there's a mistake," Daniel said, keeping his tone conversational, though his grip on the water glass tightened. "You have me at table 2. "Well, that's the thing," Julian interjected, his voice smooth, lacking any malice, which made it worse. "The tables are tight, mate. And Sophie, well, she wants her parents on either side of her, for the photos. You know how it is. It's a big moment for the lineage." The lineage. The word hung in the air, heavy and pretentious. Daniel looked at Elena. "Elena?" Elena sighed, the light in her eyes dimming into annoyance as she was forced to deal with him. "Daniel, don't make this awkward. You know how sensitive Sophie is right now. It's just dinner. We're all in the same room. Julian hasn't seen her in 3 years. He needs to catch up." "I've been here for every dinner for 12 years, Daniel said softly. "Exactly," Sophie snapped, slamming her chopsticks down. "You're always here. You're always hovering. Can't I have one night where it's about my real dad? Why do you have to insert yourself into everything just because you paid for the salad?" The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Julian looked down at his wine, swirling it, a faint smirk playing on his lips, the look of a man who knows he has won without fighting. "I'm not inserting myself, Sophie. I'm your stepfather," Daniel said, the title feeling flimsy in his mouth. "Step? Exactly. Step," Sophie muttered. "Just let Julian sit with us. Please don't ruin this." Daniel looked at the three of them. The unit, the real family, reunited by the convenience of his funding. He saw the way Elena's hand rested near Julian's on the table, not touching, but close enough to share warmth. He saw the defiance in Sophie's eyes, a reflection of the mother's entitlement. He realized then that the argument wasn't about a chair. It was an eviction notice. "Fine," Daniel said. He stood up, leaving the water unfinished. "Table 2 is fine. Whatever makes the photos look right." "Thanks, mate. Appreciate you being a sport," Julian said, raising his glass again. "I'm going to the study. I have some calls to make," Daniel said. "Don't work too hard," Elena called after him, her voice light, relieved that the obstacle had removed itself. "We're going to open the Pinot next." Daniel walked out of the dining room, the sound of their renewed laughter chasing him down the hall. He entered his study and closed the heavy oak door, leaning his back against it. The silence of the room wrapped around him. He looked at the walls, lined with awards and architectural renderings of skyscrapers he had helped build, structures designed to withstand wind, weight, and time. He walked over to his desk, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out a file he hadn't touched in years. It was the prenuptial agreement he had never enforced, and next to it, the deed to the house. He didn't read them. He just placed his hand on the stack of papers, feeling the texture of the reality he had been ignoring. He wasn't part of the family at table 1. He was the landlord. And landlords, he thought, as he stared out the window at the dark driveway where Julian's rented convertible was parked, eventually collect rent or evict the tenants. For the first time all night, Daniel's pulse slowed. He wasn't angry anymore. He was clarifying the terms of the contract. Manhattan was gray that Tuesday. A monochrome grid of steel and rain that matched Daniel's internal landscape. He sat in a corner booth of a quiet, dimly lit bistro on 54th Street, a place where deals were made in hushed tones, and the waiters knew better than to interrupt a silence. Across from him sat Nora Vance. She wasn't just a shark, she was the entire ocean. They had gone to Columbia together 2 decades ago, but while Daniel had built skyscrapers, Nora had built a reputation for dismantling marriages with surgical precision. Hypothetically, Daniel said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Nora didn't smile. She adjusted her glasses, looking at the spreadsheet Daniel had slid across the table. It wasn't a napkin sketch. It was a comprehensive forensic accounting of the last 15 years. Mortgage payments, tuition fees, car leases, credit card consolidations, vacation expenses, a ledger of love expressed in dollars. Hypothetically, Nora repeated, her voice dry. If a client came to me with this, I'd tell him he's not a husband. He's a venture capitalist investing in a failing startup. Daniel looked down at his phone. It vibrated silently on the white tablecloth. A notification from Elena. Can you transfer $2K to the joint account? Julian wants to take Sophie and her friends to dinner tonight. It's a bonding thing. He didn't reply. He didn't even feel the usual spike of irritation. Instead, he felt a strange, cold clarity. The house, Daniel said, looking back at Nora. Solely in your name, Nora confirmed, tapping a line on the document. Purchased prior to the marriage? No, just after. But the down payment was from your inheritance, and you've maintained the mortgage exclusively. New York is an equitable distribution state, Daniel, but given the commingling, it's messy. However, the pre-enup you never talk about? It's ironclad if you activate it before the 10-year clause shifts. Wait. She looked at the date. You have 3 months before the terms change. I know, Daniel said. They don't know? No. Nora took a sip of her iced tea, studying him. Daniel, why are we here? You're not the type to pull the plug unless the patient is already dead. I was told I'm not real family, Daniel said. He said it without emotion, like reading a weather report. My wife and daughter made it clear. I'm the wallet. I'm the logistics manager. But I'm not the blood. He flipped the phone over so he wouldn't see the screen light up again. Another text had come through. Daniel? Did you see my text? Don't be petty. If I am not family, Daniel continued, his voice steady, then I have no familial obligation to support able-bodied adults. I want to know what happens if I stop. Not a divorce, not yet. Just a cessation of services. Nora raised an eyebrow. You want to starve the beast? I want to see if they can survive without the host, Daniel corrected. I want to separate my assets. I want to ensure that the college fund I set up for, Sophie, which is a revocable trust, is actually revocable. I want to know that if I walk away tomorrow, I walk away with everything I built. Nora pulled a legal pad from her bag and uncapped a fountain pen. The scratch of the nib on paper was the only sound for a moment. The revocable trust is yours to control until she turns 21 or graduates, depending on the stipulations. You can freeze it. As for the credit cards, if they are supplementary to your primary account, you can cut them off with a phone call. The house, you can list it. It's your property. She stopped writing and looked him in the eye. But Daniel, you know what this does, right? This isn't a warning shot. This is a declaration of war. Once you turn off the tap, there is no going back. People like Elena, they don't learn lessons. They seek revenge. Daniel looked out the window at the rain streaking the glass. He thought of Julian sitting at his table, drinking his wine, charming his wife. He thought of Sophie sneering at him. He thought of the years he had spent trying to buy his way into their hearts, only to find the price of admission kept rising while the door remained locked. They said they wanted nothing from me, Daniel said, picking up his phone and sliding it into his pocket, leaving the texts unanswered. I'm just going to give them exactly what they asked for. Draft the papers, Nora, he said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. Not for filing, just have them ready. I want to know I have the exit door unlocked. Nora nodded slowly. I'll have the draft by Friday. Friday, Daniel repeated. Friday is the graduation party. Perfect timing, Nora said, a grim smile finally touching her lips. Daniel walked out into the rain. He didn't open his umbrella immediately. He let the cold water hit his face, washing away the fatigue. He had a role to play for a few more days. He would be the quiet, check-writing ghost they wanted him to be. Until he wasn't. The backyard had been transformed into something out of a lifestyle magazine, just as Elena had demanded. Strings of Edison bulbs draped between the ancient oaks, casting a warm, amber glow over the 200 guests mingling on the manicured lawn. The champagne tower, the one Daniel had argued was excessive, stood shimmering in the center of the patio, a crystal monument to his capitulation. Daniel stood near the catering tent, holding a glass of sparkling water. He was wearing the tuxedo Elena had picked out for him, but he felt less like the host and more like the event planner checking on the staff. Guests drifted past him, nodding politely or offering a vague, "Wonderful party, Daniel," before gravitating toward the center of the garden, where the real gravitational pull was located. Julian was holding court. He had brought his guitar, of course he had, and was currently sitting on a stool near the small stage, strumming a casual, bluesy riff while recounting a story about a backstage mishap in Berlin. A circle of parents, including the judgment-heavy Andersons, listened with rapt attention. Elena stood right beside him, one hand resting possessively on his shoulder, laughing a little too loudly at his punchlines. And there was Sophie. She looked radiant in her white dress, the embodiment of youth and promise. She wasn't looking for Daniel in the crowd to thank him. She was sitting cross-legged on the grass at Julian's feet, looking up at her biological father with an expression of adoration that Daniel had never received in 12 years of helping with homework, driving to swim meets, and funding summer camps. He's quite the character, isn't he? Daniel turned to see Margaret, a neighbor who had always been kind, if a bit gossipy. She was looking at the trio with a sympathetic tilt to her head. He certainly commands a room, Daniel replied, keeping his face neutral. It's nice of you to be so open-minded, Margaret said, dropping her voice. Most men wouldn't be comfortable having the ex-husband headline the party they paid for. It's Sophie's night, Daniel said automatically. The script was easy to follow, even when it tasted like bile. Whatever makes her happy. A cheer went up from the center of the lawn. Julian had started playing a song, a cover of a classic rock ballad. It was rough, soulful, and undeniably charismatic. Elena was swaying to the music, her eyes locked on Julian's face. Then came the moment that shattered the last illusion. Sophie! Elena! "Come on up here," Julian called out, stopping the music. "Let's get a picture of the team, the original trio." The crowd clapped. Elena pulled Sophie up, and they flanked Julian. He wrapped his arms around them, pulling them into a tight, photogenic knot. Flashbulbs from hired photographers popped, capturing the perfect image of a reunited family. "Daniel!" someone shouted from the back, maybe Margaret trying to be helpful. "Get in there!" Daniel took a half-step forward, instinct propelling him toward his wife and daughter. But Elena looked up. Across the 20 feet of lawn separating them, her eyes met his. There was no invitation in them. There was a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head. A warning. Don't spoil the aesthetic. Don't ruin the moment. Sophie didn't even look at him. She was busy fixing Julian's collar. Daniel stopped. The half-step retracted. He forced a smile, raised his hand in a dismissive wave, signaling, "No, no, let them have it." The crowd laughed, accepting his deference as modesty. The photographer snapped another series of shots. The original trio. The real family. Daniel set his glass down on a passing waiter's tray. The ice clinked, a tiny sound lost in the applause. He looked at the house, the sprawling colonial structure he had refinanced twice to renovate. He looked at the people drinking his wine and celebrating the man who had abandoned them. He checked his watch. 9:15 p.m. He didn't say goodbye to anyone. He didn't make a scene. He simply turned around and walked away from the light. He navigated the perimeter of the garden, stepping into the shadows of the hedges, moving silently toward the side gate that led to the driveway. His car was parked separately from the valet lot. He unlocked it, the chirp of the alarm the only greeting he received. As he backed out of the driveway, he could still hear the faint sound of Julian's guitar and the laughter of his wife. They were having the time of their lives. They didn't know that the ATM had just gone offline. They didn't know that the man who held the roof up had just walked out from under it. Daniel turned onto the main road, the darkness of the street soothing his burning eyes. He wasn't going back tonight. He drove toward the city, toward the silence of a hotel room, leaving the noise of the real family behind him. The suite at the St. Regis was silent, save for the rhythmic hum of the air conditioning. It was a sterile, expensive silence, the kind Daniel was beginning to appreciate. It had been 72 hours since he had walked out of his own backyard. He hadn't gone back. He had sent a courier for his laptop and a suitcase of clothes, leaving the house in Westchester to its new, celebrated occupants. He was awake at 2:14 a.m., reviewing a structural proposal for a high-rise in Chicago, when his phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up the dark room with a single name: Sophie. Daniel stared at it. In the past, a call at this hour meant a flat tire, a teenage heartbreak, or a forgotten key. His body reacted with a phantom jolt of adrenaline, the muscle memory of 12 years of parenting kicking in. He reached for the phone, his thumb hovering over the green button. He swiped right. "Hello?" His voice was rough with sleep he hadn't actually been getting. "Daniel? Oh my God, you picked up!" Sophie's voice was high, jagged with panic. Background noise filtered through, sirens, shouting, the distinctive heavy bass of a club music system that had been cut off. "You have to help. Please." Daniel sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The carpet was plush under his feet. "Calm down. What's happening?" We're in Montauk, at the surf lodge," she stammered. She was crying, the ugly, terrified sobs of a child, who realizes the world has teeth. Julian. He wanted to get a VIP table for the graduation trip. He ordered all this champagne and… Daniel, his card declined. And then he tried to argue with the bouncer, and there was a fight, and they're saying if we don't pay the tab and the damages right now, they're pressing charges. The cops are here. Daniel closed his eyes. He could picture it perfectly. The charm wearing thin, the entitlement colliding with reality. "Where is Julian now?" Daniel asked. "He's arguing with the police. They have him in handcuffs," Sophie wailed. "Mom is freaking out. She's trying to call her bank, but her card got flagged because of the jewelry she bought yesterday. Daniel, the bill is $4,000, plus the broken mirror. You have to wire it, or give them a card over the phone. Please. The officer is looking at me." Daniel breathed out slowly. He looked at the window, where the city lights of Manhattan blurred in the rain. He imagined Sophie, standing in her designer dress, terrified, looking for the safety net she had spent the last month cutting holes in. "Let me speak to your mother," Daniel said. There was a fumbling sound. Then Elena's voice came on. She sounded breathless, frantic, but underneath was that familiar note of expectation. "Daniel, thank God. It's a misunderstanding. Julian's bank blocked the transaction because of the travel location. Just give the officer your Amex. I'll transfer it back to you on Monday." "Julian's bank didn't block it, Elena," Daniel said quietly. "He doesn't have it." "Now isn't the time for a lecture," she snapped, her panic sharpening into anger. "My daughter is about to be taken to a police station. Just fix it." "Fix it," Daniel repeated. The words hung in the air of the hotel room. "Yes. Why are you wasting time?" "Elena," Daniel said, his voice dropping to that terrifyingly calm register he used in boardrooms when a project was being terminated. "3 days ago, in front of our friends and family, you and Sophie made it very clear where I stand. I am not family. I am a wallet. And tonight, the wallet is closed." The silence on the other end was absolute. Even the background noise seemed to recede. "What?" Elena whispered. "You wanted Julian. You wanted the real father. Well, he's there. This is a family emergency, Elena. And since I'm not family, I have no standing to intervene." "You can't do this," Elena hissed. "She's your daughter." "She told me she wasn't," Daniel corrected. "She was very specific. She said I was just the guy you married, and you agreed." "Daniel, please." Sophie's voice came back on the line, hysterical now. "Dad, please." The word dad hit him like a physical blow. It was the weapon she only pulled out when she needed ammunition. It might have worked a week ago. It might have worked for the last decade. But tonight, it just sounded like another transaction. "I'm sorry, Sophie," Daniel said. "But you have a father. He's right there in the handcuffs. Let him be the hero." "Daniel!" He ended the call. For a moment his hand shook. The silence of the room rushed back in, heavy and suffocating. He felt a wave of nausea, the biological imperative to protect battling against the resolve of his dignity. He wanted to call back. He wanted to fix it. It would be so easy to say the numbers on his card and make the fear go away. But he didn't. He placed the phone face down on the nightstand. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He turned it off completely. He lay back down in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain, knowing that hundreds of miles away, the lesson had finally begun. The silence in the Rhys household had been replaced by a low-level, grinding friction. It had been 10 days since Daniel left, and the ecosystem of the house was failing. The pool service had been canceled, the first check to bounce, and the water was already taking on a murky, algal tint. The daily housekeeper, unpaid for 2 weeks, had quietly stopped coming, leaving the kitchen counters cluttered with the debris of 3 adults who were accustomed to being cleaned up after. Elena sat at the kitchen island, staring at the stack of envelopes that had become her morning ritual. Overdue. Final notice. Service suspension. Across the room, Julian was sprawled on the sofa, still in his pajama bottoms at 11:00 a.m. He was watching a talk show, eating cereal out of a mixing bowl because no one had run the dishwasher. The rock star allure that had seemed so intoxicating at the graduation party had evaporated, leaving behind a middle-aged man who chewed with his mouth open and complained about the quality of the Wi-Fi. "The internet is lagging again, Elle," Julian called out, not looking away from the screen. "Did you call the provider?" Elena felt a muscle twitch in her jaw. "I can't call them, Julian. The account is in Daniel's name, and he's not answering." "Well, try harder," Julian muttered. "I need to upload some demos later." Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and felt a cold stone of regret settle in her stomach. He wasn't a partner. He was another dependent. The bail money for the Montauk incident had decimated her personal savings, and now, with her credit cards frozen pending security review by the bank, she was effectively destitute. She stood up, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. She needed to fix this. She needed the architect. 2 hours later, Elena walked into the lobby of Daniel's firm in Midtown Manhattan. She was dressed in his favorite dress, a navy sheath that hugged her waist, and she had spent extra time on her hair. She looked like the trophy wife he had always seemed proud to display. She told herself that Daniel was just sulking. He was a man of routine. He needed to be needed. She found him at a cafe across the street, a place where he often took lunch meetings. He was alone, reading a dossier, a half-eaten sandwich on the plate. "Daniel," she said, her voice soft, breathless. He looked up. His eyes were clear, unshadowed by the exhaustion she had seen on him for years. He didn't stand up. He didn't smile. He simply gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Elena." She sat down, reaching across the table to cover his hand with hers. He didn't pull away, but his hand remained limp, unresponsive warmth. "We need to stop this," she said, letting her eyes well up just enough to look vulnerable. "It's been a week. You've made your point. The house is a disaster. Sophie is miserable. She misses you." "Does she?" Daniel asked, taking a sip of his coffee. "Or does she miss the Uber account?" "She misses her father," Elena lied, squeezing his hand. "And I miss my husband. Julian is just a guest. He's leaving soon. I know things got heated, but you can't just abandon us, Daniel. We're a team. You're the rock." She leaned in, dropping her voice to a whisper. "Come home tonight. I'll make that risotto you like. We can talk. Just the two of us." It was a performance that had worked a dozen times before. The promise of intimacy, the stroke of his ego. She waited for him to soften, for the relief to wash over his face. Instead, Daniel gently removed his hand from under hers and picked up a napkin to wipe his fingers. "I'm not coming home, Elena," he said. The tone was conversational, devoid of anger, which frightened her more than shouting would have. "What do you mean? You can't stay in a hotel forever?" "I'm not in a hotel anymore. I've rented an apartment," Daniel said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sealed white envelope. He slid it across the table. What is this? Elena stared at it as if it were a bomb. It's a schedule, Daniel said, of the utility shutoff dates. I thought you should have a timeline so you can make arrangements. The electricity is paid through the end of the month. The water, however, is overdue. Elena's face went pale. The seduction evaporated, replaced by the sharp edge of panic. You're cutting off the power? Daniel, that's insane. You own the house. I do, Daniel nodded. And as the landlord, I'm informing the tenants that the subsidy has ended. You told me I wasn't family, Elena. Family supports each other. Landlords just collect rent. And since you haven't paid any— You bastard! She hissed, the navy dress suddenly feeling like a costume. You're enjoying this. No, Daniel said, standing up and picking up his dossier. I'm not enjoying it. I'm just balancing the books. He looked down at her, and for a second, a flicker of the old sadness crossed his face. I would have given you everything, Elena. I did give you everything. But you wanted the one thing I couldn't give you. You wanted me to be him. He nodded toward the street, toward the world where Julian existed. Go ask the real father to pay the light bill, Elena. Let me know how that works out. He walked away, merging into the lunchtime crowd, leaving her sitting alone with a cold cup of coffee and an envelope that weighed more than the table it sat on. The gravel crunching under the tires of his car sounded loud in the quiet cul-de-sac. Daniel put the car in park but didn't shut off the engine immediately. He sat for a moment, looking at the house. It was a beautiful structure, Georgian colonial, brick facade, ivy creeping up the trellis. He had chosen the brick. He had chosen the ivy. But looking at it now, he didn't feel the pride of ownership. He felt the detachment of an appraiser. He stepped out, briefcase in hand. The front lawn, usually manicured to within an inch of its life, was shaggy. A few newspapers sat yellowing in the bushes near the porch. He unlocked the front door with his key, a key that felt heavy in his pocket. The air inside was stale. The foyer was cluttered with Julian's equipment. Guitar cases, a tangle of cables, a half-empty bottle of bourbon sitting on the antique console table. Daniel? Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing sweatpants, her hair messy. She looked tired, stripped of the graduation glamour. When she saw him, her face lit up with a tentative, desperate hope. Mom! Daniel is here! She yelled, the relief in her voice unmistakable. Elena rushed out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked thinner, her eyes rimmed with red. The stress of the last 10 days had aged her. You came back, Elena breathed, walking toward him, her arms opening slightly as if to embrace him. I knew you would. I knew you wouldn't just leave us like this. The power company sent a final notice today, and— Daniel held up a hand. He didn't step into the embrace. He stayed on the doormat. I'm not staying, Elena, Daniel said. His voice was calm, the voice of a man delivering a quarterly report. I'm here to give you a heads up before the sign goes up tomorrow. Elena froze. What sign? The for sale sign, Daniel said. I've listed the house. The realtor will be coming by on Monday to take photos for the listing. You'll need to have the place cleaned up by then. The silence that filled the hallway was absolute. Sophie gripped the banister, her knuckles white. Elena stared at him, her mouth opening and closing without sound. You're selling our house? Elena finally whispered. My house, Daniel corrected gently. The deed is in my name. The mortgage is in my name. And since I'm living in the city now, I have no use for a 5-bedroom estate in the suburbs. But where are we supposed to go? Sophie cried out, her voice cracking. This is my home. You can't just kick us out. I'm not kicking you out immediately, Daniel said, checking his watch. The market is hot. It will likely sell within the month. That gives you 30 days to find alternate arrangements. I imagine Julian has a plan? He's the head of the household now, isn't he? At the mention of Julian, Elena's face twisted. A flash of humiliation crossed her features. Julian hadn't come out to greet Daniel. He was likely hiding in the den, avoiding the reality check. Julian doesn't have any money, Daniel. You know that, Elena screamed, the tears finally spilling over. This is cruel. This is vindictive. You're doing this just to hurt us because your feelings were hurt. My feelings weren't hurt, Elena. My eyes were opened, Daniel said. He walked over to the console table and picked up the bottle of bourbon, examining the label. You told me I wasn't real family. You were very specific, not real family. Real family doesn't let you pay the mortgage for 15 years and then treat you like an outsider at your own table. He set the bottle down with a sharp clack. I accepted your definition, he continued. I am a stranger, and strangers don't provide free housing in Westchester. It's simple economics. You promised to take care of us, Elena sobbed, grabbing his arm. You promised. Daniel looked down at her hand, clutching his suit sleeve. He felt a phantom pang of the love he used to have for hers. But it was distant, like a memory of a movie he had seen a long time ago. I kept my promises, Daniel said, gently removing her hand. I provided. I protected. I loved. Until you told me it didn't count. He turned to the door. Daniel, please. Sophie ran down the stairs, stopping halfway. I'm sorry. Okay? I'm sorry I said that. Just don't sell the house. Please don't make us leave. Daniel looked up at her. He saw the fear of a child who had broken a toy she couldn't fix. I accept your apology, Sophie, Daniel said. But the house is still going on the market. Part of growing up is realizing that words have consequences. You wanted your biological father. You have him. You wanted me out of the picture. I'm out. He opened the door. The evening air rushed in, cool and clean, chasing away the stale smell of the dying house. 30 days, Daniel said, not looking back. Good luck. He closed the door on their wails. He walked to his car, got in, and drove away. He didn't look in the rearview mirror. He was already thinking about the apartment in the city, the one with the view of the river, the one that was quiet and clean and entirely his own. 6 months later, the sky over Manhattan was the color of slate, matching the mood in the conference room on the 42nd floor. The view from the window was spectacular, a sprawling grid of wet concrete and crawling traffic, but inside the atmosphere was sterile and quiet. Daniel sat at the long mahogany table, his hands folded on top of a manila folder. He looked different than he had in the summer. The tension that used to bunch his shoulders was gone. He wore a charcoal suit that fit perfectly, and there was a calmness in his eyes, the look of a man who had stopped swimming against the current and finally climbed onto the shore. Across from him sat Elena. The change in her was less subtle. The designer blowouts were gone, replaced by a simple ponytail that looked hurriedly done. Her coat was one he recognized from 3 seasons ago, and she looked tired. Not the frantic exhaustion of the Montauk incident, but the deep, grinding weariness of someone who has spent 6 months counting every penny. "The terms are as we discussed," Nora said, sliding a document across the table. Her voice was professional, but when she glanced at Daniel, there was a flicker of warmth, a shared understanding that went beyond attorney-client privilege. "The Westchester house has closed. The house proceeds have been split according to the prenuptial agreement. The spousal support is a lump sum, which has already been transferred." Elena stared at the pen. She didn't pick it up immediately. "Julian is gone," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the paper. Daniel didn't flinch. He had heard the rumors through mutual acquaintances. The real family hadn't survived the first month of rent payments in a Queen's walk-up. "I'm sorry to hear that," Daniel said. It wasn't sarcasm. It was a polite acknowledgement of a fact, like commenting on the weather. "He said he wasn't cut out for domestic stress." Elena gave a bitter, hollow laugh. "He went to Austin with a backup singer. He didn't even say goodbye to Sophie." She looked up at Daniel then, her eyes searching for the man who used to fix everything. "Sophie had to defer her acceptance to Brown," Elena continued, her voice trembling. "She's taking classes at Hunter and working shifts at a Starbucks in the city. She's really humbled, Daniel. She asks about you." Daniel nodded slowly. He thought of Sophie, the girl who had sneered at him for being boring, for being a checkbook. He hoped the coffee shop job was teaching her the value of $1 in a way he never could. "She's a smart girl," Daniel said. "She'll figure it out. Hard work is a good teacher." "She misses her dad," Elena whispered. "She has a dad," Daniel said, his voice gentle but firm. "He's in Austin." Elena flinched as if he had slapped her. She looked down at the divorce papers, the tears finally spilling over. "We made a mistake. I know that now. We took you for granted. I thought the excitement was what I wanted, but I just wanted to be seen. And now I'm invisible." "You're not invisible, Elena," Daniel said. "You're just on your own. It's what you asked for." She picked up the pen. Her hand shook as she signed her name on the line. Elena Montero. She was no longer a Rhys. Is there any chance?" she asked, capping the pen. "Maybe not now, but in the future. Coffee? Just to talk?" Daniel looked at her. He saw the history, the years, the memories, but he also saw the graduation party. He saw the table where he didn't have a seat. He saw the phone call in the middle of the night where he was just an emergency contact. "No, Elena," Daniel said. He stood up. He felt lighter than air. "I hope you and Sophie find what you're looking for," he said. "Truly." He turned and walked out of the conference room. He didn't look back. He walked down the hallway, the sound of his footsteps steady and strong on the marble floor. In the lobby, he buttoned his coat against the chill. Nora walked out with him, matching his stride. "That was hard," Nora said quietly. "It was necessary," Daniel replied. They stepped out into the bustling street. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement glistening under the city lights. Daniel took a deep breath of the cold air. It smelled of exhaust and rain and possibility. "I found that jazz club you mentioned," Daniel said, turning to Nora. "The one in the village. They have a set tonight." Nora smiled, a genuine bright expression that reached her eyes. "I'd love to go, but are you sure? It's not too loud?" "I think I'm done with silence," Daniel said, offering her his arm. She took it. They walked together into the crowd, two figures merging into the rhythm of the city. Behind them, in the high tower, Elena sat alone with a check that would run out too soon, realizing that while she had finally gotten what she wanted, freedom from the boring, transactional husband, she had lost the only thing that had ever been real. Daniel Rhys had been the foundation, and without him she was just standing in the rubble.